Hi, my name is Randy Engstrom. I am the director of the Office of Arts and Culture and the acting director of the Office of Film and Music, and it is my distinct privilege to welcome you all to the June mixer of the Seattle Office of Film and Music. I want to give a huge shout out to all the staff that made this happen, Alex Rose in particular, and Ali Lee, all the incredible staff from the Office of Film and Music and from the Office of Arts and Culture. Also, we have a bunch of arts commissioners and music commissioners in the house tonight. Can you guys, they're volunteers, so give them love. We'll give them pizza. This is the second consecutive months that we've invited you into a conversation around how the city can do a better job of supporting our creative community, our creative workers, our artists, and our creative industries. Last month, we had a big focus on the world of tech and the world of art and how we can bridge between those two. What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And tonight, we're going to be talking about the needs of individual gig workers. When you came in, you should have been given a couple of documents. One that's the results of an economic impact study or a creative economy study that the Office of Film and Music and the Office of Economic Development produced, and another that's the findings from a group of really incredible Evans School students from the UW who took a qualitative analysis to some of that data and made some recommendations to the city. Part of why we're here tonight is that we got a lot of good information about how people make their living with their creative practice. But what didn't really show up in that report in the way that we needed it to was how individual workers, individual artists, gig workers make their living in this city, in a city that is increasingly expensive and increasingly competitive. But it's also a city with incredible opportunity and an incredible network of both creative talent and resource and capacity. If we're able as a city to connect the resources to the artists and creators, I think we have an incredibly bright future. And looking at our friends from Asa Mercer Middle School, when I think about the economy 25 years from now, and I am aware that the robots are coming, those jobs driven by creativity, empathy, and human storytelling are the ones that are still going to be jobs. So the work that you all do is actually the future of the economy of this city and of this country. And we need to start building the systems now that are going to support you to do that work for the next 5, 10, and 20 years. So tonight, I did say that. So tonight, you're going to hear from some really, really brilliant luminary folks in this town who are putting together their hustle in really interesting ways. It's going to be moderated by one of my newest, most favorite people, Amy Lillard, your state film commissioner, and the executive director of Washington Filmworks. And it's really going to be asking the question of how are people doing this now? How are people being successful, knitting together a living as artists and creatives in Seattle in 2019? And where could we go from here? Because we fully intend at the end of this summer, after listening to as many people as we can, to bring forward interventions that will make things better like in 2020 and things that are going to make things better in 2040. We need both a long-term and a short-term strategy to keep this city the creative, incredible place that I've had the privilege of living in for 25 years and that I look forward to raising my daughter in for at least another 25. So, have pizza, enjoy your time, introduce yourself to someone you don't know right after we hear from this incredible group of creatives that we're lucky to have in our city. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Amy Lillard.
Our panelists to just come up and sit down. I'm just curious now before we get started, how many of you in the room classify yourselves as gig economy workers? All right, how many of you are creative entrepreneurs that employ gig economy workers? All right, right on. Well, welcome. So I am Amy Lillard. I'm the Washington State Film Commissioner. I think this is going to come down. So I've had the great privilege of chatting with these folks before tonight about the work that they do, and we have a short amount of time to mine the amazing information that we talked about. So what we did, instead of like spending a long time introducing them or introducing themselves, we asked them some questions in advance, which we think do two things. Help you understand how they succeed being gig economy workers and also introduce them as humans. So we're going to flash those. They're going to just continue throughout our process. But I picked 5 things about each of you to introduce you, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. So with that, this is Michael Huang. Go, woo!
Asa Mercer, shout out. Go Mustangs.
Go Mustangs.
I'm from that school.
So things that you may or may not know about Michael, he toured the world as a break dancer. His second job out of college was a club promoter. He spent some time in the advertising world in New York, which he said sucked his soul. And he took his freelance digital work into a creative entrepreneurship known here in Seattle as the Millie Agency. Welcome, Michael. Naomi, there at the end. Welcome, Naomi. Little do people know that perhaps she launched Colors Northwest magazine back in 2001. Yeah. She also worked for the Seattle Times and the PI and the Tribune. She's a long-time, well-known, well-respected social justice advocate. You know her work because she has been known as a documentary photographer with the Black Lives Matter movement and a communications director for the Social Justice Fund Northwest. And by the way, 2 weeks ago, this lady left her full-time job to become a full-time creative entrepreneur. So welcome to you. Last but not least, Lacey Levitt. She is an accomplished producer of feature films, episodic series, and cinematic XR. Her movies have premiered at festivals such as Sundance, South by Southwest, Toronto International Film Festival. She is the 2017 Mayor's Award for Achievement in Film, and a board member of Cafe Nordo.
Former.
Oh, former. What's
But I
still
love
in your
them.
bio?
I love them. Go see them. It's amazing. Champagne Widow on now.
She is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Electric Dream Factory. I just want to point out, give these people amazing. As you walked in, you got all of their bios, and as I said, they are just amazing human beings that I want you to get to know. So we're going to jump right into the conversation. With that, as we move into the conversation, as we thought about what gig economy meant, it meant people who are going from job to job or contract to contract, or who have businesses that are literally, trying to find for their next client. So that's how we're defining the gig economy in this conversation, so everyone knows and is on the same page. With that, what was interesting in getting to know these folks over the last couple of weeks is that all of them had unique and personal challenges that impacted the way that they do their work. And so I want to kind of start with shining a light on those conversations. I'm going to start with Naomi on the end. So as we got to know each other, you talked about this thing called your learning journey and how it took you 10 years to really have the confidence to talk about yourself as a photographer, which is now a big part of your gig economy work. So what was that about, and why did it take you so long to feel confident to be what you are?
Yeah, I think a big part of that was coming out of the newspaper world, where there was a really strong line between folks that did words and then folks that did pictures. So in a newspaper, when I was working in newspapers, you would never, as a writer or an editor, you would never be a photographer. Those are two totally different things. And so when I started taking pictures about, 10, 12 years ago or so, I was taking pictures all over the world, basically, but I didn't really consider myself a photographer because that's something that other people did. And to be honest, the people that did that were all white men, and I wasn't that either. I wasn't trained in that. I didn't necessarily know how to do that in the way that I thought that other people did. And so even though I did it for about 10 years before I actually felt comfortable saying that's what I did, it was really the encouragement of other people who were like hiring me to do that work or encouraged me to do that work that really gave me the confidence to feel like it was something that I could do. And I think that's a real lesson to all of us, that, other folks, there's that saying like, give me the confidence of a mediocre white man. Like other people like wake up in the morning, they're like, I can do everything. And I think a lot of us who are marginalized in different ways, we don't have that feeling. We feel like the opposite. And I think it takes encouragement from other people and a feeling inside of ourselves that we're actually able to do things that gives us the confidence to kind of step forward.
But what I love a little bit about where you're at and where you are as a professional is you're like, this is a lifelong learning journey. And so we had this really interesting moment where you talked about now that you're going out on your own and you're having this conversation about how do I value my work? How do I monetize my work? And how does that lifelong journey interface with that for you? Like, what are you thinking about and how are you figuring out how to go from things that you have always done to making it your career?
Yeah, and I would say that is very much a lifelong journey in the sense that I don't actually know what I should be charging for things. It's a very mysterious world, like rates and fees, and the value of something to me is very different based on where I situate myself in the community. So something that might not be as valuable to another person or another photographer is really valuable to me because it's something I want to do because it's connected to a community that I'm a part of or I care about. So honestly, I wish there was some sort of like rate sheet that existed for everyone that said this is the rate the base rate that a photographer should be paid, or a videographer, or a graphic designer, all the different things that I do. But that doesn't really exist, so I'm just sort of figuring it out on my own, and I don't really know the answer. I think one of the things that's kind of taken a hold in the nonprofit community that I think could really be helpful here is a lot of folks in nonprofits are now posting salaries with all their job positions as an equity issue, because we know that when folks don't post salaries and when they don't have salary information, it's typically folks that are marginalized, whether they're women or people of color or queer folks, who undervalue their own work because they don't necessarily know what their work is worth. And so they end up getting paid less, and then they get paid less in the next job, and the next job, and the next job. And so that's something that I think we could do a lot better at around equity, just posting what's the average salary for such a thing, or the average rate for such a thing, so that there's more transparency, and it puts things on more of a level playing field.
By the way, right, claps to that, right? So Lacey, as we talk about personal journeys and or personal things that have happened in your career that impact the way that you do business now, I'd love for you to talk about the quote-unquote imposter syndrome.
Yeah, well, that's something that I've heard and certainly felt, and I hear Naomi sort of echo it too. It took me a really long time to call myself a filmmaker, despite the fact that I was making films or a part of making films for many years. And I think for me too, as my main, how I make my living is as a film and television and XR producer, and there's really no roadmap for that, especially in Seattle. Like we're not Los Angeles, we're not New York. I spent a couple years in New York, but there's this very specific structure that exists there for here's how you move up the ladder in the Hollywood system. And here we're sort of always like, truly, I feel like, after the sort of big boom of the 90s, which I definitely, missed just by my age, there was this great television boom, there's a great film boom, a lot of people got a lot of work, and then that went away with the incentive, arms race, which started with Vancouver. So we were really inventing the wheel in terms of how do you make a living making feature film and television in Seattle. And so I felt like, in some respects it was really great not to have that pressure of here's how you need to be doing things, and at the same time there was no clear path. And so it took me a really long time, like Naomi, to really consider myself like I'm a real producer, I'm a real filmmaker. And for the longest time it's like, well, we're just doing, like, this is exactly what we want to be doing, this is all we're going to do, my friends and I, and what became sort of the Seattle film industry, but there was no set path for how to do it. So it took me a long time, especially whenever we would go to, I went to the Creative Sundance producing lab, and I felt like such like a backwoods, like coming in with my hayseed in my teeth, like, hey guys, like I'm not from around here, I've been doing stuff my own way. And sometimes I still even get a little bit of that when I'm in like the LA or New York circles, and I feel a little bit like, well, I'm a filmmaker, but like from Seattle, I'm a producer, but from Seattle. And it took me a while to sort of get over that, to sort of, and not only think of my films as art, but also realize that as a producer, I'm not just somebody, I am somebody who has worked in the gig economy for, I mean, truly my entire adult life. I've never had like a regular corporate 9 to 5 my whole life. But I'm also a jobs creator as a producer, and it took me a really long time to sort of actually understand what that was and what that meant and to own it. And, you know, because of the challenges that Seattle specifically has been facing over the last, I mean, for me, especially 10 years, it took me a really long time to sort of wake up to what that meant and what that meant for me personally, what that meant for my film community, and what we should do and what we should fight for in terms of trying to get not just the work made, but also get paid to do the work. And that took me a really long time to understand that for myself, because I always put the work first and myself second. And once I sort of thought about it as putting my workers first, then it became much easier for me. But for me as a person, that was never, I don't know. I don't know if it's a female thing, I don't know if it's a whatever thing, but for me, I've always put myself sort of after the work getting made, and at a certain point, you just kind of can't do that anymore.
I love her, like, she's like, I'm just from Seattle, and yet she's producing an episodic series this summer for Adult Swim, which is a division of Turner, and she's also, you know, producing an independent film, but she's just from Seattle, so.
Not just, I mean, I love Seattle. I'm just saying when we're on the hoity-toity Hollywood parties, I'm like, hey guys, I do this too.
So Michael, I love this. So Michael took a bit of a left turn and hightailed it to New York, where, you know, it sucked his soul, as you like to say. But what was interesting about that process, or what you talked about as part of that process, is the self-actualization, right? This personal journey that you went on that literally, like, informed the way that you created your business now. So talk about that journey for you.
Yeah, so first clarification, I love New York City. The job that I took sucked my soul. But that's advertising, right? Anyone who's worked in advertising or been a contractor to an agency kind of knows what I'm talking about. But I think for me, I was about 25 years old when I did that, and I had just done 2 years at Razorfish as a social media strategist. I think, you know, I was still, in my head, like a college grad, and I was still figuring out direction, and I was still a bit stuck on the notion that I required, now that I've got a college degree as well as the college debt that goes with that, there's no way to live life without a corporate job and the benefits that come with that. And I think, I was kind of I wasn't self-determined in my decision-making in life, and more so just kind of working the blueprint, right? And I think a lot of people do that whether you're in the gig economy or you're not. And when I quit my job, and I want to asterisk that I didn't like finesse a layoff, I quit with nothing. My mom got upset, right? It's like, you should have thought this through. Shout out to immigrant parents. But I was like, no, I had to do it. I had enough. If I kept doing it, I would have been, teetering on, alcoholism, that stuff. So I quit, and then I think I went through like all this spiritual stuff, meditation, whatever, not having money, and I think what I ended up was realizing, like, wow, I have just like lived life kind of like unawake to my own self. Like, as soon as I got every job I went to, whether it was the internship in college or it was that advertising job, I would change the way I dressed, I would change the way I talked, I would hide my tattoos, I would make sure that all the stuff I learned growing up in South Seattle was gone from my vocabulary. I would participate in the stupid March Madness brackets that I really didn't care about, because UW was never in there. And so, like, I was like, yo, like, I am really, like, and you spend 40 hours a week at those jobs in New York, like 60 to 70, and that's all of your life, and you're spending all this time, we're talking about imposter syndrome, like, I was being an imposter. And so realizing, I just need to undo all of that, like, brainwashing, and realize, like, I just need to figure out a way to be myself in whatever I do, especially if I'm trying to live off that. And fast forward 4.5, 5 years later, running my own agency, which was not the original plan, I've realized that that's not just like a thing, that's like an asset. Like my absolute like superpower that I bring to the table, to the point where I've built it into like a very strategic, even business model in the way that we differentiate ourselves from other agencies, is that I'm a unique person with a unique background. And there's plenty of advertising agencies out there that are not that. Like they're literally like the same person throughout their whole like company, right? And so we've won business on that. We've gotten the OMWBE certification, all of that. We've built, like we've like positioned a lot of our agency on that. Beyond that, I've also realized now that I'm like enjoying the perks and enjoying the mental kind of healing from that, that not only should I do it for myself, but like I should create a space like this for other people like me. And that's been really exciting, really, really self-actualizing, and kind of opened up a whole new path for me in front of me. But basically creating a workplace where we have the same structure, rigor, client base, and kind of caliber of work that any large creative agency would have, but we are not, inheriting certain practices or cultural kind of practices that would inhibit people from being themselves, which kind of dovetails into diversity and inclusion, dovetails into youth culture, dovetails into just general inclusivity, right? And so we're really excited to be able to say that even though we're small, our diversity percentage between gender, from gender identification, sexuality to ethnic background is like way higher than every agency standard in any state or nationally, right? Because that's important. And coming from what I've experienced, like me living that kind of corporate agency life, I think that like self-actualization goes beyond the self. It goes, if you want to have that in especially a creative field, like you have to set forth that example. So yeah, that's it.
So one of the things that came up, and this is I'm going to call like the 1 minute lightning round that I'd love you to comment on. Each and every one of you talked about, I'm going to call it, what is the bread and butter work versus the cake, right? That push-pull between those creative things that you love to do and the things that keep your door open. So how do you grapple with that? Again, lightning round, I know it's a big question, but it's hard to be creative in Seattle, make a living being creative in Seattle, right? Raise your hands if you agree, right? It's hard. So these people are figuring it out in some way, shape, or form. What does that look like for you, and how do you reconcile? Everyone is wildly creative on this panel. How do you reconcile that, and what do you do with it? So I'm going to start with Michael and go backwards.
Okay, basically same things. As long as you know, to me life is about like decision making isn't binary, but you can make it binary. You can at least like make it binary as you want, and you can basically say, is this going towards what I want in life? Is this not? And then you just choose the direction. That always choose what's moving you closer. And maybe that decision isn't all the way on the nail, but you need to realize this. If you are working for yourself, and if you believe in what you are doing, and that you believe that you want to succeed, and you believe in subsisting off your work, then your existence merely in and itself is revolutionary. So you should give yourself permission to exist, and that means doing whatever you can. And set your moral lines, set your boundaries, draw the lines in the sand. After that, don't second guess yourself, because there are plenty of people that don't deserve it, that are taking really bad work and doing really bad things to make that money and exist. You might as well do what you can.
Lacey Levitt, 1 minute.
How do I even tap that? For me, I've been really lucky since I haven't had to have a day job since 2007. But up until that point when I was working a documentary, which was never going to, pay my bills, I found it easier to do a day job that I could leave and then do my creative work on the side. I realized over the next 7 years that it was really hard to combine stuff that was in film, video, the sort of corporate gigs. That was much more soul-sucking to me, and I had to eventually step away from that work, even though it was steady and well-paid, because it was keeping me from developing long-term projects that we would eventually make, feature films, television series. You can't for me as a producer and for a lot of people as writer, directors, you can't do both. You kind of have to choose one or the other. So I found it easier to do a soul-sucking but like easy to leave at the door day job and then do my creative stuff and push that forward than to, for me personally, do corporate work and then also do feature film. I couldn't do both. Feature film really took 100% of my time once I could get there. But now, you know, I've done some projects that have been, especially in the VR space, which is incredibly expensive and cannot do it, you know, as an indie budget like I can with my feature film sometimes. If there's something that excites me about the project, even if it's not 100% exactly what I want to do, which is how I choose my feature films, if it's not something I 100% believe in, but I can learn a new skill, or I can employ people right before we go to do this other thing, that to me will push it over the edge. And it's usually a new skill, and you know, in this day and age, you always have to be learning new skills. So if there's something about the project that really, really excites me creatively, even if the entire package of, say, working with a massive corporation isn't going to be the most exciting, if I can learn something, put something out in the world that I'm proud of, and employ people at the same time, and pay my own bills, then it's worth it.
Naomi.
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, I appreciate the Mike's more philosophical approach. I would say more on the practical tip, like for me, if I hadn't had a couple foundational clients that I knew would provide a stable monthly income, I don't think I'd be able to have quit my job. I'm able to have an assurance that I'll be able to pay my bills, and I know I can pay my health benefits, which is really important to me, and I know that's consistent over time, which is not the case with any of the other type of work that I do, which is, as some folks in this room know, I'm not the best at invoicing, so so I might not get my checks as quickly as, that's probably going to change now, Sharon, so don't worry. I'm probably going to be better about that now, but have not always been the best on the business side of things. Well, I'm still not good at it. I don't know anything about it, which is another conversation, but having that steady income of having some consistent monthly clients is the only reason why I feel secure doing this at all.
By the way, that's something that came up consistently in these conversations and in the conversations that we're having around creative economy, which is creativity is one thing and the business of creativity is painful pretty much for everyone.
Hate it.
So hate it. I heard a hate it in the room, right? I would love to know from your perspective, you know, as people working in the creative economy on a day-to-day basis, what are Seattle's challenges with a creative economy? And it's a great place to make things, but what are the unique challenges for creative people? And I'll start with Naomi at the end.
Again, on more of the practical side, I think obviously the cost of housing and healthcare is astronomical in the city. I mean, not the city for the healthcare, but just the cost of housing. And then you couple that with getting individual health insurance, which I just did a week or so ago, and it was really awful. It's like tremendous amount of money for benefits that you can't really use because the amount of money out of pocket is going to be so high that you might as well just never use the care. And that's actually how I figured out what plan to get, was figuring out what's the best plan if you just avoid getting care for anything. And that should not be the calculation that we're making when we're choosing our health benefits, right? But that's just real. And so I think figuring out ways to help folks who are in that position either find housing that's more affordable, having some sort of tax structure that doesn't penalize folks on the lower income. I think those are all things that could go a long way to making this something that people could actually do. And then, of course, you know, health insurance reform is huge.
Lacey.
I'll say specifically in the film industry, being able to attract, because of course, no offense, our incredibly low film incentive, it's really hard to attract, you know, bigger projects to come and shoot here, so filmmakers and film workers can get their union days in, which is then coupled with the massive corporations in our town who do not want to pay for union benefits for all of their commercials and corporate work. So that little confluence makes it really, really difficult to be able to be a worker in film who can still get health insurance.
Yes, health insurance is important. I will take the philosophical route again, since everyone covered very well the logistics. I think from a cultural standpoint, again, having grown up here my entire life, I think one thing, and maybe this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think there is especially right now with everything that's changed, there's a little bit of a performative culture around saying how Seattle presents itself as an arts-forward city when it isn't anymore. And I think that isn't so much an issue beyond like Facebook posts, but mostly when it comes down to how we value our artists, right, and creatives. Down to the lack of, and just as an example, just to draw a very large contrast, from my travels and also my experience in the dance world, like, I've been to France where they pay artists 1,500 euros a month just for being an artist, just for existing. So that's like one end of the spectrum. And then you come back to a place like Seattle and it's like, yeah, we have this great arts history, this great arts heritage, right, in the city, and everyone's so artsy here. But then I have all of my friends that are under, especially age of 30, are all trying to get out of the city because they just can't make enough money. There's no way. It's almost like in their minds, they're not even complaining about it anymore. They're just like, it's not a possibility. I'm going to LA or New York as soon as I can. And I think that is a problem, right? Because if we're thinking about the problems now, yes, affordability, all that, I think thinking in the future, we may not have a creative economy if it continues that direction, right? If we don't figure out a way to culturally also shift the conversations, which an event like this is part of helping. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think the other thing comes down to just volume and infrastructure. For me, even as a creative agency, Wexley School for Girls just closed, and that was great because we won a bunch of business from them. But it's also indicative of the direction. Like every other creative agency is now rebranding to a technology or consulting agency. We are very much one of the few creative agencies that I would say has the actual chops to be an agency for larger clients in town. But yet I'm unfulfilled because ultimately the best work I'm going to be able to do that's highest paying is going to have to be with a tech company. And so, of course, I have to think about, do I expand operations to LA or New York? And I think that can be boiled down to a micro level as well. If you're a freelancer or someone who wants to create really awesome work and get paid well for it, you kind of have to go, well, do I stick around here when there's only one soundstage, in town? It's tough. So I think that it goes from culture to actual execution and logistics. I'm done.
Okay, here we go. These are super, super fast. I call them at my house, don't think, just answer questions around our dinner table. So ready? What's your favorite app that helps you do business?
IMDb Pro.
That was good.
Trent.
Which one?
Trent. It transcribes things for you automatically.
So glad you said that. I didn't know what that was.
It'll save your life.
What? Headspace.
Where is your clubhouse in Seattle?
Northwest Film Forum.
My house?
Where is your clubhouse in Seattle?
My house, really.
Massive Monkey Studio, Chinatown.
Nice. On an average day, how many hats do you wear at any given time?
I don't know if I have enough fingers.
A lot.
Yeah,
There you go. That's the answer is this.
a lot.
What creative in Seattle inspires you in the work that you do? I'm getting them, aren't I? It's amazing.
I'm going to say Sharon Williams because she's right here and it's also true.
Yo, I'll take that. Thank you.
I'm going to go for a non-film person right now and say Waxy Moon.
That's tough. I'm going to shout out my young homie, Avi Loud.
There you go. So one of the things that we're not going to have time to get to is that each and every one of the people sitting on this panel talked about the sense of community in Seattle that they could not succeed without. And I regret not being able to get to that particular question, but if, we're going to be around, like, I give that tribute to this community, and that's one of the joys that, I have as the film commissioner, and one of the joys I think that all of us, who live and work in this economy feel every day. So I just want to compliment this community because that is who we are. There's something different in the water around here. So, round of applause for these people. So at this point in the evening, what we're going to do is, I am inspired by this process at the city. I've been doing my job for 12 years, and for the first time, if I'm being totally candid, the mayor is coming to us and saying, what can we do for you?